matter where you go in the world, no matter what job you do or what quiet corner you are forced to explore, you will almost inevitably find that if people are there, then somewhere along the line there will be a scary story attached. To some extent, I think it's natural. That's a very human thing to do. Somehow, we as a species are simply programmed to make stories, especially scary ones about the darker, quieter places at the fringes of where we live. Perhaps it's an instinct, a hangover from the days when the quieter places were inhabited by things that could harm you, when the dark at the end of the cave would house a saber-toothed tiger and the edge of the forest concealed the waiting wolves. Maybe our imaginations, our propensity for making myths is a defense mechanism. Being scared of the dark, of the quiet places, is a way of stopping ourselves from becoming prey to the things that may or may not be lurking there. That's why in every school, in every wood, every abandoned building, in almost every job, you will find some kind of scary story linked to the darker places. The ghost that lives under the stairs, the hobbling thing crouched in the boiler room, or the tattered old scarecrow on the lonely road. I remember explaining this idea when I first started working the night shift at the Convi-Mart, and at first most of the guys laughed at me. How could their ghost story, their workplace tale of terror be related to this instinct when the area they were talking about was not really dark at all, but dimly lit by a string of fluorescent spotlights? It was only later, when the area did retreat into dark, that they began to take the idea a lot more seriously. Whoever it was that started the story about Aisle 38 never left their name. Obviously, it must have been some worker who either dreamed it up independently and then played some tricks to back up the claim, or someone who experienced something weird and made the story to match. Whatever the case, by the time I started working there in 2001, the story was well known and well established enough for it to be shared with me during my first week on the job. The Convi-Mart, for those that don't know, is the largest supermarket in Moorton. It's a huge place that stands pretty much at the entrance to town at the beginning of the high street. It's part of a much larger chain of stores and is basically in the same mold as Tesco, Asda, and Morrison's, just a little less well known. At one time or another, pretty much anyone who has lived in Moorton will have used the Convi-Mart, and a great many will at one time or another have worked there, seen as how the place was one of the town's biggest employers. This was particularly true in the period from August to January, and especially for those aged 16 to 18. For a few months every year after the local kids got their exam results, the tills and aisles of the Convi-Mart would be filled with faces of teenagers that up until a few weeks earlier had occupied seats in the classroom of the local high schools. For some, this was their first taste of employment and provided pocket money, whilst they attended the local sixth form or a college in the city. For others, with no plans of ever leaving Moorton, it was a fair job with a decent pay and a half a chance of promotion, if they stick at it. Basically, if you were from Moorton, you not only knew the Convi-Mart, but also half the people who worked there. Like many of my former classmates, I decided to take a job at the Convi-Mart while attending college in the city that Moorton was a fringe town for. Since I was still living at home in Moorton, the money I earned paid for transportation to and from college, for my meals whilst there, and for a fair few drinks every weekend, either in the city or in the pubs and bars around town. And since I had classes most days and wanted to be out with friends during most weekend evenings, I decided that the best shifts for me were what was referred to as the twilight shifts. These shifts, in the days before the 24-hour opening, basically involved coming into the store at closing time for customers, locking up the entrance and spending the next 5 or 6 hours stocking shelves, changing labels and adjusting prices. Now I know, whilst a huge supermarket might seem a strange setting for a ghost story, I'd argue that in some ways it could be said that the entire job was a little creepy. To me, there is always something a little odd about places that are usually bustling with people when you see them almost deserted. Think, for example, of abandoned theme parks, a child's playground seen at night, or the cities in a state of hush paralysis when seen during the pandemic. Take away the people, the buzz and the noise, and suddenly these very familiar, mundane places become oddly hollow and desolate, like veins or arteries from which the blood has been completely drained, the banks of long-dried rivers or tunnels through which trains will never again pass. When busy places are silenced, they take on an almost contradictory character. Somehow being empty makes them feel haunted. The same was true of the Convi-Mart store. Most people didn't talk whilst they worked because the job involved them moving to different sections all the time, making conversation difficult. The result was that the entire supermarket, half lit with the fluorescent lights, would be muted and quiet. The only sound was the odd whisper, the soft shuffling of feet, and the constant clack and clang of tins and boxes being moved onto the shelves. It was therefore in the staff room before and after shift that the strange stories of aisle 38 were shared, and out on the shop floor that they were played out for all to see. The story went that aisle 38, which had variously housed the baked goods, the toiletries, and the meat counter over the years that the store had been open, was a place best avoided whenever the sun went down. The stories relating to this one aisle of a busy supermarket all related to the night shift workers, and never customers who walked happily down them during the day. According to the accounts, which were always friend of a friend stories about things that happened to someone who no longer worked there, this one aisle was the site of many strange occurrences, from tins flying off the shelves on their own accord, to strange localized drops in temperature that caused the products to get frost on them. Some told of the workers stacking up shelves and feeling the breath of another person bristling against their necks, whilst others said that they had moved a cereal box on a high shelf and caught a glimpse of an eye staring at them from behind the stacks of products. Worst of all was the staff calls. Every few months, as everyone was apparently busy stacking shelves, there would be a call over the tannoy, the broadcast system that wasn't supposed to be used at night. When it did come alive, a rough, gravelly voice, speaking as if though through a mouthful of dirt, would speak.
Moorton Lane to aisle 38. Aisle 38, Moorton Lane.
The name announced was the same. Obviously, most people put the announcements down to a prank, an easily repeated joke that was sprung by generations of different workers who had heard about it from the previous staff. Oddly though, no culprit was ever identified, and a few of the older workers, those who had been there for years and who steadfastly refused to stock anything in that aisle, swore that the voice never changed. To me, this always sounded like a ridiculous claim, until the night of the blackout. I had been working close to the front of the store, stacking the fridges with fruit and veg, which I didn't mind since it was summer and the fridges provided some relief from the oppressive heat. I had just begun unloading tomatoes from a big pallet when the tannoy announcement came. Saying it now, you would imagine that this infrequent occurrence would be cause for laughter, everyone knowing deep down that it was just someone dicking around. But it never was. Whenever that tannoy crackled into life at a time when it was not supposed to, everyone stopped what they were doing and listened carefully. This time, however, things went a step further. As usual, the voice began to ask for some guy called Martin Long. And as usual, it was the same raspy voice that asked.
Moorton Long to aisle 38. Aisle 38, Moorton Long.
Rather than simply signing off there, however, on that particular night, the voice continued, repeating the phrase over and over. The voice became quicker and quicker, more frantic and more agitated. I looked around at the others. Everyone had stopped what they were doing. I was glancing around, trying to work out who was missing, which of their colleagues might be playing the prank. I remember seeing an older woman named Dawn standing opposite me. She was rigid like a statue, comically holding on to an aubergine but frozen in place by a sense of timid anticipation. I smiled as if to reassure her that it was obviously just a joke, but Dawn never got the chance to see me, for just as I turned, the lights went out. In an instant, the entire store was plunged into darkness. From behind me, someone said that we should all stay calm and just stay still, that the emergency generators would kick in and we'd be able to see again.
Stay still so you don't fall and hurt yourself,
the voice said. Though judging by the scream that came from the other end of the store, the instructions had come too late. At first there was just one scream, then two, then an entire chorus. People called out in the dark in utter panic, and it seemed to me in pain. I'll admit that hearing that made my stomach do a flip, and for a moment I considered abandoning my post and simply running out of the fire exit, if I could find it in the dark. What really creeped me out though, what made my blood run with ice, was how the voice on the tannoy didn't stop. If the power was cut, if the lights had gone off, the fridges I was working next to fallen silent and gone dead, then there would be no power to the store at all. If that was the case, then how was the tannoy working? Still the voice came, though now the message had changed. No longer asking for Martin Long, but laughing. An awful croaking laugh which, although it must have escaped from a mouth, sounded as if it had never touched human lips. I know it might not sound like much, but I can tell you from experience that standing there, paralyzed in the dark with the sound of laughter ringing in your ears, is a horrible, unnerving feeling. Made worse when the laughter stopped and the message from the tannoy changed.
You're all gonna die in here,
it said.
All of you will die.
At that point, I'd heard enough. Though it wasn't allowed and I could technically have been sacked for doing it, I smuggled my phone onto the shop floor in the pocket of my uniform. This was in the days before phones came with a torch function built in. But I knew that if I turned it on, my old house brick of a Nokia would at least shed some light. I fumbled for the switch, turned the thing on and flashed its glow toward the end of a row. I instantly wished I hadn't. What I saw was a mouth hanging there in the darkness. There were no eyes, no body or face to speak of, just a set of teeth. Around 5 feet from the ground, with cracked, blistering lips all around it, and the tiniest stretch of skin that was completely and totally white. It was there for only a second, like an image illuminated by the flash of a camera. Then it was gone, either stepping back or moved away into the dark. Somewhere to my left, more people began to scream. By the time the generators kicked in and the place green lights came back on, 9 employees of Convi-Mart had been injured. Some people reported having their hair pulled, others being kicked so hard that they had been thrown to the floor. A girl named Beth that I had been in the same class as at school had 2 of her front teeth knocked out, whilst an elderly gent called Paul had been thrown to the ground with such force that he broke his wrist. I don't suppose you'd like to guess which aisle they had been reluctantly working on? In the days that followed, the management ran an investigation, operating on the assumption that it was one of the employees that had committed these assaults. They assured us that they would be checking the CCTV footage, and whoever was close to the tannoy before the blackout would be dismissed and criminal charges brought. What they found on the CCTV was never revealed to us, though I will tell you that no one was ever disciplined. I left that job the following week. In the months after that, I was told by numerous workers how customers had brought back tin produce stored on aisle 38 that they found gone rotten inside the tin. How there could be maggots in a product that has been sealed into a can, I didn't know, but that was apparently the case. 2 months after the blackout, the entire aisle was closed off to the public with tape and plastic barricades, and all the products stored there moved to another part of the store. Within 6 months, the store was remodeled, a process that involved bringing a few of the outside walls further in and extending the front of the store. As a result, aisle 38 is no longer part of the store itself. The space where it used to be is now outside of the back perimeter wall, facing the adjoining fields. For a while, the area where it used to be was turned into an outside seating area, complete with wooden benches for weary customers to sit on. Over time, however, the place became abandoned. For some reason that management was unable to explain, the wood used to make the benches would always become damp and rot. Having replaced the benches several times with no luck, management eventually decided that the best thing to do was let the outside space rot along with it. About 5 years ago, that seating area was taped off and a sign put up telling people that the benches were unsafe. It has stayed like that ever since, with the one curious addition that someone has taken the time to paint a single phrase onto the wall above them. Now anyone passing around the back of the Convi-Mart store will not only find 2 rotten benches sectioned off with tape, but also the words Martin Long to aisle 38 painted in red above them. And inside the market itself, meanwhile, there have been no further incidents. Whilst there are now 41 aisles in the store, the numbers, in acknowledgement of this bit of local folklore, go from 37 to 39 without a row between.